Right, it's 7:37 here on SABC News. You're watching Morning Live. Thank you very much for staying with us then this morning. There are calls for more transparency when it comes to dealing with natural resources in the mining sector. Today is the fourth and last day of investing in African Mining Indaba being held in Cape Town. Delegates have been discussing the impact of power shortages, safety and climate change on mining. On the sidelines of the Indaba, other stakeholders such as labour and communities are still battling with challenges in the sector. Yesterday, families and miners gathered for the fourth commemoration of the Lily Mine tragedy, where 3 miners died underground. Another issue is that of tensions between mining communities and companies over mining rights and inclusive participation. Right. Well, to discuss the significance of events such as the Mining Indaba amid the challenges in the sector, we're now joined in the studio by Mr. Christopher Rutledge, Natural Resources Manager at Action Aid South Africa, as well as Mr. Joseph Montisetsi, a President of National Union of Mine Workers. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining us here on Morning Live. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. I must just point out that I'm not with Action Aid South Africa. I'm with Makua, which is Mining Affected Communities United in Action.
All right, well, even
Sorry
better.
About that,
No problem. In terms of the involvement of labour and communities, and I suppose that then goes directly to you then, Mr. Rutledge, when it comes to mining events such as the Mining Indaba, is there real sort of involvement? I mean, you see the families sort of forcing their way in. That shouldn't be the case. They should have been welcomed in any case to speak. I mean, if I'm looking at the panel, as I was doing my research, you see the speakers sitting on the panel and so forth, it's really the bigwigs.
Yes.
So my question then would be, what's the point?
Yes, I think that image that you see there, where all these bigwigs, if you want to call them that, are having a conversation amongst themselves about, how to divide the pie, if you will. You know, kind of reminds one of the old conference when Africa was divided. So really nothing has changed from colonial days, where those in power sit in little corners and decide what is good for the rest of us. And this sits at the heart of the problem that we have with the current mining legislation and the way that things are currently set up. Communities are completely excluded. Historically, the development of legislation in South Africa, we trace it back to the Freedom Charter, because if one looks at the legislation, it says that the legislation is there to benefit all South Africans, particularly those who have been disadvantaged through colonialism and apartheid. But when we look at the outcomes 25 years or 18 years after the MPRDA was put in place, we see that what's happened is that business has advanced tremendously. I mean, they have flighted out of the country millions, billions of rands, which we as a country don't see. Government has been raking in about 25% of that. Unions and workers as a whole rake in just over 30% of that. And mining communities are allocated 0.9% of the total revenue that is generated in the sector. Of the 0.9%, 70% of that is going missing. Communities cannot account for it. We did a study over the last 2 years, and we found that of the money that they say is allocated to communities in the social and labor plans, we can't find it. They would, for example, Anglo-American would say, we have this beautiful food garden that we built for the community. When we get there, it's a little garden in somebody's backyard, which they spend millions on. So this is what communities are facing, is that those in power have systematically, through legislation, through power influence and power broking, excluded the voice of communities. And we're saying that's enough.
I don't want this to be a sort of bashing of the mining Indaba, but I'm going to bring you in here, Mr. Montisetsi. You've been very vocal. Of course, NUM has been very vocal in terms of the rights of miners. And, I sort of found it a little bit ironic that the president of Sierra Leone, Julius Maada, is in fact one of the people speaking at the Indaba. I mean, if we look at the diamond trade in Sierra Leone and the gross human rights violations in the past that we had seen. We'd seen people's hands and limbs being chopped off and so forth. So I wonder how that speaks to mining rights, especially in a country where we already have miners who get trapped in mines, people who die underground, and then you sort of bring the president of a country that's known to have violated the rights of miners, having children digging for diamonds and so forth. I'd like to have a bit of your reaction on that. I mean, that's sort of a side issue that I noticed, but I found it quite important.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I think we have to start by understanding that mining as a business in Africa was actually done to exploit Africans by certain individuals who come from abroad. Even what was happening in Sierra Leone, it is not necessarily the government that is killing people. There's a sponsorship of what we call the people that don't want to do business in a transparent way. They want to extract minerals on the black market, and they mobilize resources to mobilize people, rebels, to do such heinous things against the communities. But we believe that Sierra Leone is now outside of that quagmire, because the new president who has been elected by majority of the people has confessed yesterday in our meeting to say that he inherited a government which was corrupt, and he's starting to clean all those things. So we hope things will be better. You can understand, even in Liberia, why Charles Taylor has been arrested. It is because Charles Taylor refused to give the Americans the oil there. Yeah. So we have a problem of people that want to bull us in Africa in order to take our resources.
Yeah. Mr. Rutledge, I mean, I want to come back to what you were talking about and just the structure of the Indaba, really. What's your take on, how it's structured and the topics that are being covered? I mean, I see that there is a lot of talk about investment, but when we talk about investment, and I think this is where you have an issue, does it really trickle down to the people that actually need it, the people that are, daily in the pits of those mines? When we're talking about all of this investment, I mean, really, it is a case of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, is it not?
Yes, I think that, for me, is the elephant in the room almost, because globally we have a problem with inequality. Yeah. And yet we continue to do the same things over and over again. This same system, this very system that has communities excluded, is the same system that has led us to a point where we are one of the most unequal countries in the world. And yet, here we are, every year, we go to Cape Town and we discuss the very same strategies, the very same structures, and nothing changes. And so that for us is a critical kind of fly in the ointment. It's there for everybody to see, but we haven't made the connection yet as a public. We haven't made the connection that what's happening in the mining Indaba is the exact same thing that led to colonialism, that led to apartheid, that keeps people in poverty today. Now, unless we change the way that we talk about
how do we change? And what do we do? I mean, it's the status quo, really. And,
yes,
where do you even begin to change that? I mean, I was even looking at the organizers of the event. Absolutely no representation at all. You look at the organizers, the people that are speaking, all of that. There's no representation at all. So how do you change something like that? Where do you even begin? I mean, I was hoping to at least see something different in the organizing committee, but even there, you see nothing. So when you say there needs to be a change, where do we begin?
So we think that the way to do this is to start at the bottom in a sense. Yeah. So we think that one of the critical issues is that in the way that we organize our society and our economies, some people are more equal than others. So if you have money and capital, you are treated as if you are special. And if you are a poor person living in Mokopane, you are treated as if you are worth nothing. And so that imbalance sits in our mining laws. So we have to start thinking about how do we change the mining law. So one of the things that we're suggesting to the Department of Mineral Resources and government is to say that when the legislation was drafted in 2002, the people at the table was organized labor, organized business, and organized government, or government per se. Communities were not there. So what we have is a sharing of the pie which excludes a important sector from the discussion. Now, when you exclude people from a discussion of how to share benefits, for example, only those people who are at the table are going to benefit, essentially. And that you can see in the breakdown. 0.9% is allocated to communities, for example. So you can see that in the breakdown, there is a lack of inclusion. So we're saying bring more people to the table so we can have a conversation about how do we fix our country, because that's really it. As long as we continue without including people's voices, we're going to have unequal outcomes. And so we need to stop that.
All right, Mr. Mthizedzi, you know, although the Department of Mineral Resources said that safety performance in mining sector in 2018 showed a 10% decrease in fatalities compared to 2017, safety is always really a concern, and particularly for you as NUM. Just, you know, paint a picture of us really about the health and safety conditions of miners. And do you feel that the mining Indaba adequately and over the years has really addressed this really huge issue within the mining sector? Because, you know, you hear about deaths in the mining sector, and then, you know, we kind of talk about it for a week or two and then it's done. And then, you know, it's almost like deaths are treated like nothing. Is there enough talk of that, or will it ruin talks of investment per se, you know, in the Indaba itself?
Yes, the companies, they can just talk a very good language about health and safety. But when it comes to practical implementation of health and safety, they don't do that because you have a manager like at Taulekwa mine, Plexdorp, who have been there as a mine manager, and people have been dying. Since 2017, 4 people died. Towards this Christmas, 4 people died. Last week, 1 person died. But the CEO maintained that person to be a mine manager while people are dying. We did have a discourse about the discussion of health and safety at the mining summit, at the mining Indaba. And we said, because ILO is here, this convention of 176 about health and safety should be amended to say that, to take away condition that workers can withdraw only if the supervisor agrees. That they must be taken out. Workers must be given the right to withdraw if the place is dangerous. And again, the full-time stewards must be trained in such a way that they understand rock mechanics, just like safety officers. And they must be given the power, according to law, that full-time steward can also assess the place and say, people must not work here. It is not the practice today. It's just full-time health and safety steward. They are not well-trained, and they don't have the powers according to Labour Relations Act.
Now, in terms of, you know, going forward, when obviously we need to talk about the issue of investment when we're talking about the mining Indaba, but how do you incorporate the fact that they want to talk about investment with also these other issues that might not be the sort of nice issues to talk about within the context? How do they how should they merge the two issues and be able to perhaps make people like you happy and say, well, this is why we have a mining Indaba?
So I think this is also part of the problem, is that the mode of capitalism that we have in South Africa is geared towards making the rich richer. I mean, that we've all agreed on that's why we have inequality. So when they talk about investment, it's about how do we make more money? How do we, as a small group of people and our investors, make more money? And we don't talk about how do we build a country. That's, I think, at the heart of it. If we were talking about how do we build a country, how do we empower our people, then we would be talking about things like artisanal mining. We've done a study which says that in artisanal mining, we could employ up to 5 million people, just 10% of the total mining sector. If we take just 10% of the total revenue generated in mining. And we say we're going to allocate 10% of that to artisanal miners. We could employ up to 5 million people, each of them feeding 4, means that 20 million people are empowered. But here we're spending billions of rands at an Indaba speaking about how do we make a few hundred people rich. Now that is the heart of the problem.
Yeah.
We are not focused on how do we build a country. We are focused on how do we make people rich.
Yeah. Ndate, just in closing as well, what would you like to hear at the end of the mining Indaba that you will say, yep, that was a great outcome?
No, the something which is very much important is that Africans must have their own Indaba before this thing happens across Africa. That should include the communities, the trade union movement, and so on. Artisanal mining is the answer to empowering the communities.
Yeah.
We have talked much about it. It must be accepted by law, like in Zimbabwe and Ghana and other countries, that people must participate in the resources of their country. This thing of criminalizing people about their own resources and you give it to somebody who comes from abroad. He had the right and legally to own minerals. It's wrong. We have to start in South Africa. We are the biggest mining country, to work with the communities, to push the government to accept the law that artisanal mining should be the answer to the quagmire that we are facing.
Are you saying that the Zama should be given a chance?
Of course. Those people, they are mining in the mines that have been alienated by these big companies. Why can't those people be given the right to mine? I mean, we pushed for them to be given it in Kimberley. There's a cooperative of diamonds, of Zamazamas in Kimberley. So we have to, that is the way to go.
All right, well, I think we can leave it on that very interesting note. Mr. Christopher Rutledge and Mr. Joseph Montisetsi, thank you so very much to both of you gentlemen for giving us your time here on Morning Live. Interesting indeed. Of course, that's our discussion on the mining Indaba. Let's take a short break.